So I think about death all the time because it's probably the central theme. It's probably the thing that I think the most about. And I think that influences how I see time and also how I think, how it influences agency. Like what actions I'm willing to take despite the judgment of others. And so a lot of times, and it might be because I have more insecurity than everyone, that I think like, man, I want to do this thing. And then I hear all these other voices of reasons why I shouldn't do it, or why somebody else will say like, that's bad, or you're bad, or like, that's wrong, whatever. And so I think I've had to come up with a lot of these devices to get around my own insecurities, to take action despite those insecurities. And the biggest one that I think about is that it doesn't matter whether I achieve all of my goals or I don't achieve all of the goals. In 3 generations, I'll be forgotten, and the only people who were naysaying against me will also be dead. And so then it's like, just do it for me. And then when I wake up every day, there's only one voice I have to listen to. I think that the more you flex whatever that muscle is of like independent thinking, the more it becomes the default way that you think. And then everyone else's action is just start looking more and more insane to you.
What's an example of that you can think of?
I mean, shoot, just the most basic ones of like living the life that you don't want, not wearing what you want to wear, not dating who you want to date, not living where you want to live. Like you're living at home and you want to move and your parents say no and you don't make the move, or you're dating a girl because she's socially accepted, by your friend group, she's safe, but like there's always some distance in between you, but you're like, I don't want to risk it, right? Or like you're in the job and every day you go there and you're like, I mean, it's okay. And the idea of just living an okay life just sounds so terrifying to me that the freedom to fail over and over again is still more fulfilling to me. At least it feels like it's real than walking through kind of on autopilot. And so I think that's a lot of the choices that other people make that seem insane to me now, but didn't seem insane to me a decade ago. You know what I mean? I think it's just like, as you practice taking more agency, taking more responsibility for the decisions, then you just get better and better at it. And then it just seems more and more ridiculous. You're like, I think I had a lot of practice with it because so like a lot of people have many voices that they hear that they feel are judging them, right? They have their friends, they have their uncle, they have their siblings, they have their cousins, coworkers, whatever. I think I had just one voice that I heard really loudly. And I was talking to one of our employees the other day, and I was trying to put it in perspective, younger guy. And I was like, I imagine how much you care about your mother's opinion and your father's opinion and and all of those other people. I was like, and now imagine that there's literally only one, because I had no siblings. I basically had no mother. I had just a father. And so like his approval was literally everything. And he disapproved of the path that I wanted to take in my life. And so I think a lot of these mental faculties or these little frameworks or these isms just came from like, how can I combat this incredibly booming voice in the background? Because like when I look at what I was doing at the time, like I was a consultant, I graduated in 3 years, I took the consulting job, I did all the things. But the craziest thing was that the moment that my father was most proud of me and he approved of my life the most was when I was the saddest. And so that's when I was like, maybe his approval isn't the right way to feel good about life. And so that started basically the 6-month journey from when I decided that I wanted to change my life till when I changed it. And I think that like as you become more able or more potent or higher agency, that timeline between when you decide you want to do something and when you actually do it just continues to compress, right? Like now if I want to change something, I'm like, let's change it, like done. We walk out of a thing, I was like, we're never going to do that podcast again, or I don't want to talk to this person again, or whatever it is, right? Whereas before it's like, okay, I have to sleep on it. I have to really think about it. And like, how am I going to, it's like, why do I care about how I'm going to say it? This is what it is, done. And it's just like, and that timeline is compressed, but the hardest one for me, like the first one was by far the hardest. And everyone since then, the nice thing is that no matter how difficult your circumstance is, if you have, like the bigger the wall that you have to get through is, as soon as you get past that one big wall, you then can use that wall as the evidence for why you can jump over the next wall, because that will be the biggest one. And so like, after I did quit my job and left my house and left Baltimore and didn't tell my dad until I was across the country, because I was so afraid, like people think of me as like some big alpha, whatever. I was like, I was so afraid of my father's disapproval that I didn't tell him until I physically left the state. Like I'm not like, think about that. Like I wasn't even just one state over. I was like 5 states over. And then I was like, hey, by the way, I'm going to California. And he was like, well, let's come over. We'll talk about it. And I was like, I'm in Ohio.
Already here.
Yeah.
Already.
And then then obviously he had a different reaction. Right. But then after that, it was like, what do I have to do now? It's like, oh, I gotta sell strangers. And I was like, I told my dad I didn't want to do what he wanted. How hard could this be? And so like it then becomes this one huge proof point. So the bigger the dragon is that you have to slay, the more evidence you have that you can slay the next dragon. And I think that is, if there's ever been a good point for why getting over the one first hard one is so hard, is that it will then give you the reinforcement that you can do whatever you need to do next. Yeah. Whenever I feel anxious or insecure or angry or sad, I'm like, what conversation do I need to have that I'm not having? And so then, and usually if I just think for not that long, I'm like, this is the conversation I've been putting off. And then, I'm not the poster child of mental health. And so I'll just call myself a pansy for not having the conversation. And then I just have it. And so again, I think it's like, I need to have this conversation, and the time between when I have it versus, or when I know I need to have it, when I actually have it, just continues to compress. And if you've ever had like a breakup or an employee firing, or a quitting, if you're an employee, like these things that you dread, I don't know if you notice it, but like the day you do it, the moment after you do it, I'm like, how many other conversations can I have? Like, I want to be like, I'm like, who else do I need to talk to? Yeah, totally. Because
become a serial killer for awkward conversations.
So like the next series of hard conversations that I had after I left home was actually like years later. So I had multiple partners, and I said I had a partner in one of my gyms. I had a partner in 4 other gyms. I had a partner in a chiro and dental marketing agency, and all of them relied on me to make money. And so all of their livelihoods were still dependent on me, but I was splitting everything, and it was horrible for me at the time. And so I remember when I ended up getting in a DUI, and I talked to a performance coach or whatever, and he was like, your stress and these conversations could literally kill you. He's like, they almost did. So I got in a head-on collision at 60 miles an hour, and I walked away, no injuries. But it was like my wake-up call, but not to stop drinking. It was my wake-up call that I needed to have these conversations. And that's what I was avoiding when I was drinking. It wasn't the alcohol. It was, what were the things that I'm avoiding, that I'm using alcohol to get away from? And so the next day, I had the first conversation with the first partner, and it was horrible. But the moment I was done, I was like, I got to call the other guy. And I called the other one. I was like, this is how it is. And the thing is I had this backstop of my death, of like, you almost just died because you wouldn't have this conversation. And so then it just gave me this courage to just be like, and whatever the reaction was, I was like, I'd rather be alive. Like, that was it. And so it's weird though, because death has been this really recurring theme in my life, that like the same thing happened when like the only thing that gave me enough balls to stand up to my dad, to be fair, from a distance from the car when I was driving halfway across the country. Like, let's not make me into too big of a hero here. Was the idea that like I started thinking like every day, I was like, I hope I don't wake up. You know what I mean? And that was the thing where I was like, this is a big enough problem that like, if you don't want to wake up, then
what have you got to lose?
Exactly. And that was it. And I was like, I have nothing to lose. And that was when I think in the last podcast we talked about this, where it's like, if everybody who's like at the bottom and feels like they have nothing going for them, reframe that as, I have nothing going for me, which also means that I have nothing to lose by taking action, it makes you a much more dangerous person. And I think that was the flip that I've had repeatedly shown to me in my life that allowed me to take the step that I was afraid to take. So it's funny, because if I look back on the instances that were the most painful in my life, every single one of them, without fail, has created a disproportionate gain, right? Like the most painful thing early on was quitting my job and leaving my dad, basically. And then that created my first business and the gyms and all of that stuff. Getting into the DUI, the head-on collision, and like that whole situation got me out of all of these failed partnerships that I wasn't willing to do. But in the moment, I was like, I'm such a failure. Like, I suck at everything. But that gave me the springboard. When I lost everything the first time after that, that then gave me like the idea that I needed to change the business model around, right? And that's what switched me into the licensing model. Right. And so like each of these times, and then that became, the first real fortune.
This is kind of like alchemy.
Yeah.
Like turning something which is worse than useless
into
something that's as precious and useful as possible.
I'm sure you know the parable of the man and his son, and he like buys the son a horse, and then it falls, and he breaks the leg, and then they're like, oh, it's so sad, and then the army comes, then his son doesn't die, and then it's like, oh, it's so great, right? And so it's one of those really interesting ones where like whatever negative situation, and this is probably good for the audience, but like if you think back to all the negative situations you had, like the really, really bad ones, when you expand the time horizon, most times they become net wins. And so then it just means that like if you're in a really tough time right now, you just got to wait. and then you'll get your reference point back on all the things that changed as a result, because most times when shit is bad, it can't get worse. So then you feel like, well, it can't get worse than this. And then your action threshold decreases, and you do all the things you know you should have done anyways. And so it's like we have this big stack of should do's, and we just wait until it's 2 miles.
Yep.
And then I'm getting
in the car.
Like the firing conversation. And you're like, well, I just fired one person, or like I just ended one partnership, I just broke up with one girl, or whatever it is. And you're like, who else do I need to talk to today? Right? Like, and then in like like you have these rapid periods of growth that happen, and then you have the next web of comfort because it's way better than you were before.
Yep.
And I think I wonder, this is more just like an open thought, but like I wonder how long like more successful people stay in that next plateau. Like I wonder if their threshold for
action stays low.
Yeah, they're I'm getting comfort, like how quickly they get comfortable into like I need to change, I need to get better. I think a lot of times the decisions that we make are predicated on the conversations we need to have, because usually like and what's interesting is like you can define commitment by eliminating alternatives. So if you're committed, you've eliminated alternative actions. Right? Like you can say I'm committed, but until you eliminate other options, you're not committed.
There's always a get out of jail free card.
Right. And so a lot of people make decisions to end relationships, to quit their job, to start the new thing, but they don't become committed to the decision until they remove the other options. And then you're forced to take action on it. And so I think actually defining those two different things. Now you could define, decision as to kill off, like decidere from Latin, but from a colloquial thing, I think there are two different instances. It's like I need to change this, and then I do change it. And the making the decision is when it becomes a commitment. I think, at least for me, it's because I have this hamster wheel on the back of my mind where I keep playing out different scenarios. And so I keep thinking like, well, maybe I need to change what I'm currently doing. Maybe if I just rethought, like, cause I'm a big frame guy. So I'm like, maybe I just need to be thinking about this differently, right? Or maybe if I zoom all the way out, the earth doesn't exist. So maybe this doesn't matter. Or maybe I'm just making a problem that doesn't exist. Maybe the best action I should take is nothing, right? Like I reframe all those things. But usually it's just because I'm afraid of something. And then that's why I'm not making the decision. And I think once I name and put a face, and it's usually not even a thing that I'm afraid of, it's one person's judgment I'm afraid of. And then when I name the person, then it becomes real. Instead of being this amorphous, like people, society, judgment, it's like Tom. Like, do I really care what Tom thinks? I guess so. It seems like I'm not making this big change in my life because of Tom.
Looks like Tom's more in control of my life than I am.
Dude. So I remember this. When I was 19 years old, I was super angry, like all 19-year-old men, right? That's the standard default, right? I was angry at both my parents because I was 19, right? And I remember blaming them for everything, blaming them for my life, blaming them for not being a better person. I literally blamed them for being a bad person. And I remember realizing that when I blamed them, that I gave them control over my life. And then the idea that the people that I hated the most at the time were the ones who actually were controlling me was the thing that most sickened me, to then actually flip my narrative to actually taking control. Like that was the one thought process. Like my mother, I'm giving her control over my romantic like my mother controls this? Fuck that. I was like, no. And so like just the idea that somebody who I was disgusted by at the time had that much power is what gave me the power to start taking action. You can move through life at 7 times the rate of other people by simply changing when you say you're going to make a decision from end of week to end of day. So think about how that stacks up. So it's like, let's say that there were 4 decisions that you needed to make. If the normal person takes a week to make the decision, and then their mind moves on to the next thing that they have anxiety for and start making that decision and decide another week, decide another week. It's a month to make those 4 decisions. Whereas the Superman that takes one decision day 1, second decision day 2, third decision day 3, fourth decision day 4, they aren't even finished the week yet, and they're where the other person is at the end of the month. And like that speed of decision making, like not paying the attention cost, the opportunity cost of your time, I think it's really profound in terms of how quickly people move through life, in terms of achieving the goals that they set out. Because people are like, how is that guy so young and he's achieved X, Y, and Z? It's like, well, what takes you a month to make a decision, we make in an hour. And then the next hour, I make another decision that takes you your next month. And so like, that's how you can go 30 times or 100 times faster than the quote average person who's overweight, has $1,000 in their bank account, and is going to die at 70. It's funny because if you regress fear to its most basic form, it's death. And death is the greatest motivator. And like, you can prove it in a simple example. It's like if I all of a sudden go up to anybody on the street and I put a gun in their head and I say, point a gun at their head and I say, go do this thing, they'll go do it. But if I say, you can have anything you want if you do this, they're willing to go 10 times harder with a gun in their face to not die. And so if you take fear and regress it all the way down to its basis form, like that's what the insecurity is. Like if they think I won't be enough, and if they don't think I won't be enough, then this won't happen. If this won't happen, I'll be alone and I'll be dead. Right? Like if you just regress it all the way down, like that's all it is. And so like the biggest achievers in life, I think have most directly tied them not doing whatever it is that they want to do to death, whether they're consciously aware of it or not. And then that's what motivates that. The tweets that I have, people don't know this, but the tweets are notes to self.
Yep.
So they're just directed at me so that I can look back on them and like be reminders of like, hey, don't do that. And so like, I think to myself, man, I'm afraid of doing this. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm afraid of what this person's going to think about me. Because if I were to be able to fail in quiet, in complete isolation, then I wouldn't care. And then I think, well, what if I don't succeed in public? What do they think then? Nothing, right? They don't think about me at all. And so obviously that comes from the perspective of seeking to gain approval and attention from others anyway. So it's like, listen, if you're insecure, which everybody is, let's be real, you might as well use the insecurity to get something out of it, right? Like one of my favorite things about entrepreneurship is like use what you've got. And so a lot of people think that they need to fix their conditions in order to get like the perfect conditions before they start. But the perfect condition is whatever one you're in, because it gives you whatever assets you have. That's the cards that you're dealt. And so you just play the hand. And a lot of people have great cards. It's like, man, I'm so afraid of, it's like, use it. It's like, I have nothing. What makes you very dangerous because you have nothing to lose, right? Like one of the really interesting things I think about it from a business perspective, but it probably applies to everything, is that there's always an advantage and a disadvantage from every position, right? So like I remember Gym Launch is still a big company and still continues to grow, but in the gym licensing space, there's not many people who can compete with us there, right? And I would talk to guys who were in the space, I would talk at a conference, whatever, and younger guys would be like, well, I want to be in this space too. And it's not fair because, you have this big advantage. And I was like, you have a way bigger advantage than I do. I was like, because if I were in your position, I would go to every single gym owner and be like, you don't want to be with Gym Launch. You don't want to be with Alex. You're just a number to him. Like, you're never going to talk to him. Like, you're just a cog in the wheel there. With me, you're going to get my personalized attention. There is just some employee down the chain that's following some process, right? I was like, but on the flip side, if I'm talking to that same gym owner, then I'm going to say, you don't want to talk to Jimmy. He lives in his mom's basement. He has no proof that he's good at what he's at. The reason that we're number one in the space is because we've done it so many times and we have a system that we know that if you go on this side, you will get this result on the outside. I was like, there's always a position and there's always an advantage. I was like, you just have to play the one you've got. And most people just look at what everyone else's advantage is and don't think, which one do I have? It's kind of like investing. Like, everyone's afraid of losing money when they invest, but the only guaranteed investment that doesn't work is never investing to begin with. And so it's like they take the long failure rather than the short one, right? I mean, it's what it is, right? You just fail long. And they're like, I prefer that. But it's like you and I are going back and forth on trying to figure out how many different ways can I say that either the people that you're worried about judgment are going to die, or that you're going to die, or that even if you do achieve the thing, they won't care anyways. Or if you don't do anything, they won't think about you to begin with. And don't you want to be thought about to begin with? Like, don't you want some level of significance? You're going to die. And I think, like, I was very grateful that, so one of my biggest inspirations or whatever, influences when I was in Baltimore was I would have lunch with my grandfather 3 times a week. So he was 90, old guy. So I would go to the nursing home and we'd have lunch 3 days a week. And listening to him talk about the regrets that he had in life, it's so much more painful to watch someone who has no options left. Like, he's going to die. I mean, he's going to die tomorrow. And he died a couple of years later. I mean, like, and he lost all his mental faculties. almost sadly, basically when I left Baltimore, one of the sad parts is I was one of the only people that kind of like kept him lucid. You know what I mean? And after that, no one really visited him. No one really did anything. And so I think he just rolled downhill. I think the lunches might've been the only thing that he looked forward to. And, seeing someone old with no options and nothing but regret. Now, not that he had everything to regret. He had things that he did really well, and I took those things from him. He would repeat the same lessons. Like every lunch, let's be real, a lot of older people kind of repeat a few key lessons, and everything that he fled during the World War II. He fled from the Germans and all that stuff because he had a Jewish sounding last name. He wasn't, but it was enough that he was fleeing, right? And he always used to say, he's like, you have two hands and one brain. I was like, use them. And that was always this thing that he said to me. And I think just like when I would think about the things that he was going up against compared to the things that we're going up against now, it just made me feel like, all right, like this is not as big of a deal as I really think it is. I don't have Germans at my door.
What were the regrets that you had?
Him?
Yeah.
He would have spent, again, there's deathbed regrets and then there's real life regrets, but there's things that he would have done differently in terms of the business. There's things he would have done differently with his wife. He got divorced, he would have done things very differently with his kids. So my mother, and her sisters, which actually talking to him about how he raised my mother helped me in some way forgive her for some of the things that I felt were wrongdoings that she had done to me. And so it's funny because, one of my favorite quotes from Blaise Pascal is to understand is to forgive. And like I think there's another saying that I like a lot, which is it's really hard to hate close up. It's like if you really see someone and you see all the things that they went through and the things that happened to them to become who they are, then you understand them and then you understand why they did X, Y, and Z. Because if we don't understand, we assume that it's because they're just evil people. And most people aren't that way. They're this way because they've been reinforced or punished for doing something like that in the past. And especially for her, she was reinforced for acting a certain way over and over and over again to the point that it was core to her character. And so when that got put on me, I was like, I hate you. You're terrible. You're evil, like blah. But like, when I looked at it on a much longer time horizon of like, she was 4 years old when she came here. She couldn't speak English. She got beat up as a kid, like all these things. I'm like, you know what? Maybe give her a little grace, And I remember when I came back and it was right around that same time where I realized I was giving this person all this power. She yelled at me for something when I came back home from college, my freshman year. And it was a standard fight, like here's the button that I press to get into the normal fight that we get into. I just remember she hit the button and I just like wasn't that upset. And it's like, I felt nothing. She like hit the button and she like hit it again harder. And I was like, and I just remember looking at her and being like, I get it. I'm sorry. Like you had a tough life. And then she just broke down and, started crying because it was like she felt understood. And I think, I know that was a roundabout way of getting back to regrets, but he regretted how he had raised her. But through his regrets, I got to see why she was the way she was. And then it diffused the bomb that was between me and her.